Hi everyone, so today I'm going to talk about advanced hedging. These are techniques and strategies that you've probably not heard before, so I'm really excited to show you some strategies of my own. To begin with, the repricing gaps. So I recently put together a video on hedging which was for beginners, so if you haven't seen that and you're more of a beginner, then if you head over to my LinkedIn profile and scroll down, or you can find a video on YouTube as well. In that video I go over what is a repricing gap, why does economic value matter, and essentially the basics of hedging. So in this video I'm going to go into more advanced hedging techniques. So I can promise you that you're going to learn something from this video because these are all techniques that I've used myself, so it's not something I've read in a textbook. These are hedging techniques that I've lived and I've breathed, so I'm happy to share that with you guys today. So let's get started. So I'm going to start by recapping the basics of the repricing gap. So the repricing gap is just when your assets and liabilities can change interest rate. So for example, if you have a 5-year mortgage, it might have a 25-year fixed term when it matures, but it could be fixed for 5 years. So in that case, we'll draw a repricing gap to represent what the typical repricing gap looks like. Here would set your overnight liabilities, and then you're likely to have 5-year assets out here, and then some different asset buckets all the way across, essentially. So this is your 1 year, overnight, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year. So it's not perfect, but you get the gist. So to illustrate non-parallel shocks, I have got some tracing paper where I'm going to just draw the base curve. So what is the base curve? The base curve is just what is the market's estimation of where interest rates are going to go. Essentially, it's like an equilibrium. There's a 50-50 chance of rates going higher or lower than your base curve. So your base curve is just from today's data, what everybody knows from the whole of the market, how does that impact where we think interest rates are going to be in the future? And from that, there's a base curve, which is basically like, this is the most likely path of interest rates for the future. I'm just going to do the base curve flat. So I'm going to say the base curve is saying that whatever interest rates are today, they're going to be the same tomorrow and they're going to be the same in 5 years. So I'm going to do this as a dotted line. This is your base and it's pink. So your pink base curve, that is just showing you against your repricing gap. So essentially that would be on a secondary axis because it's not off the same axis of your repricing gap. So basically what that's saying is your base curve is flat all the way across. That is the amount that you're discounting your future assets and liabilities. If you remember from the first video, I said it's about time value of money. So essentially you need to take your assets in the future and you need to say, what are those assets worth in terms of today's money? So if that's our base curve there, then we're saying these assets in the future, the base curve is flat, so we're going to discount those assets there based on this base curve. So next I'm going to show you what a parallel shock looks like. It's likely that you'll have a parallel shock. Usually your parallel shock will be plus 2.5%. So your parallel shock is just a step up or a step down from your base curve. So it looks like this. So here's your parallel shock, right? So we've got our base curve there, and then we're going to overlay the parallel on top. Basically, all your parallel shock is literally just right above the base curve. So that's normally 2.5%, it could be 2%, it could be 1%. It's going to be the same distance from the base curve in your overnight bucket as it is in your 5-year bucket because it's just a step up. So even if your base curve, instead of being like that, if it was like that, so you can see it's saying that it's steadily increasing over time. Your parallel shock, so it's going to be the same distance all the way across, and that's your parallel up shock. So your parallel up shock looks like that. Your parallel down shock, you can flip it and it looks like that. So it's the exact same, just reversed. So what does that mean for your hedging? Well, what it means is any assets that you've got here that are higher than your baseline, higher than your parallel line, these are going to be the ones that are drawing your sensitivity because they're above the baseline. So any assets above the baseline, we could hedge this position, this position, this position, and this position, and they would all benefit a parallel up shock and make it better. So if we do the reverse again and we say parallel down, now it's the opposite. So we don't want to hedge that, we don't want to hedge that, we don't want to hedge that, we don't want to hedge that. We do want to hedge this and we do want to hedge this. Another really important thing about the repricing gap is that you have to remember that the further across you go, the more sensitive it is as well. So for example, if you're hedging your parallel shock like this, then you need to be hedging further out if you want to make more of an impact. So for example, if you were only able to do one swap and you've got all these positions, you would want to put it as far as possible because that's going to get you the best results. So next, I'm going to talk about non-parallel shocks. So these are the shocks that are quite difficult for people to hedge because the parallel is quite straightforward. You know that if it's higher, then you have to hedge your assets. If it's lower, then you have to hedge your liabilities. I'm going to show you how to hedge non-parallel shocks and also show you how you can hedge multiple shocks at the same time. I'm going to add a third shock into the mix. So this one, a steepening type of shock. So here we have our base. So this one is steepening. So it starts low and then it crosses over the base at the 3-year and then it goes high. So we said before that we were going to hedge the parallel shocks because it was above the baseline. So what we're saying for the non-parallel shocks is where it's above the baseline, you're going to look at hedging your assets, and when it's below the baseline, you're going to look at hedging your liabilities. So here, if we hedge the 4-year or if we hedge the 5-year, that would improve that scenario. Or if we hedged overnight 1 year, then that would improve that scenario because those are both liability positions. So even though the 2-year is below because it's an asset, then you wouldn't hedge it because that's improving that scenario. So that's why with this steepener, this non-parallel shock, you want to hedge at the end generally because as the repricing gap is more sensitive as you're going across, then you're going to have more impact with a hedge that's going to hedge the 5-year than this 1-year position, for example. So let's add in another variable. So now we're saying we're hedging 2 shocks. So remember what I said about how you can hedge multiple shock scenarios. With the parallel up, anything that's an asset is going to improve your parallel up here, and anything that's a liability is going to worsen your parallel up. What we're saying is we could hedge this 1-year position here and it would improve the steepening because it's a fixed liability. So that would improve the steepening, but it would worsen your parallel up. So you would have a trade-off. Whereas if you were to do an asset where they're both over the baseline, and remember that's the most important thing, is if it's over the baseline, then that's where you hedge an asset. If it's under the baseline, that's where you hedge a liability. So essentially, when you're hedging these multiple shocks, this position here is the one that would cause the greatest benefit for both the parallel up and the steepener scenario. So remember that with these scenarios, you can just flip them. So say you're looking at a parallel down, not a parallel up, and you're looking at a flattener, not a steepener. You're gonna literally just flip them the other way around. Then you'd be seeing the opposite thing, which is where are my liabilities that are lower than my baseline. So it's good to remember that when you're looking at non-parallel shock scenarios, you can just flip them. So that's the steepener. And now we've got a flattener. And the exact same principles apply, it's just reversed. So instead of looking at hedging assets, you'd be looking at hedging liabilities and vice versa. Sometimes it might look like this, which is a normal yield curve. It means that there's something causing it to go inverted, which could be a recession or something like that. The most important thing to remember is the parallel shock is based off the base curve. So what does that mean? It means it's not a 2.5% shock on 0%. It's a 2.5% increase on the base curve, which already has priced in what the market thinks interest rates are going to do. If the market thinks interest rates are going to be 0 forever, parallel ups is going to be 2.5% forever. But if it was to say that, well, things is going to be negative, the parallel up is not going to stay like that. It's not going to stay 2.5% all the way across. It's going to be 2.5% above where the base curve is. So what does that mean? It means that when somebody tells you interest rates are going up, so we should position for an interest rate up scenario, you need to be saying the base curve already has the increase in interest rates priced in, unless you think interest rates are going to be 2.5% higher than where the market's already priced in an extra 2%, for example. Unless you think interest rates are going to be 4.5%, which would be like this, then don't position yourself for any of these scenarios, because these scenarios aren't saying, I think interest rates are going up or I think interest rates are going down. That's what your base curve is saying. Your base curve is the market. Your shocks are overlaid on top of the market expectations. Even if you positioned yourself for a parallel down, if your base curve is significantly above zero anyway, it might be saying there's going to be a 4% increase. Therefore, your parallel down, you're not saying rates are going to be negative, you're just saying they're only going to increase by 2% instead of 4%. So that's the really important distinction to remember, is the different shocks that you're looking at, they're not where interest rates are going to go, it's where interest rates are going to go over and above where the market already thinks. So I hope that you found this video useful. These are just a couple of techniques that I like to use when I'm hedging the repricing gap. You can contact me through the Global Banking Hub if you've got any questions. The Global Banking Hub is a platform that I designed for treasury banking professionals. It's like a tool that you can use alongside your regular job. It's a really easy way to learn things that you might not otherwise have an opportunity to learn about. Over 10 years ago, I first started working in treasury. I was just an analyst. I started straight away working in interest rate risk. That's why it's the area that I'm most confident with, and it's the area that most people need help with, which is useful because I can give that help. When I was an analyst, there was a lot of information to learn, and I remember so many acronyms and I just didn't understand what was going on. And I tried to buy a book on interest rate risk, just loads of calculations. It just didn't make any sense to me. Over time, I did manage to learn everything, and I was really thrown in at the deep end. That's the reason that I created the Global Banking Hub, was because I wanted to create somewhere where you can easily learn all this stuff and it's not so much of a black box. You've got courses where you can learn about liquidity, you can learn about FTP. We just launched a course on AI in banking, which helps you to get an overview of how AI is useful for the whole bank. So there's loads of benefits to being a member. You also get access to weekly reports. These aren't just reports where you get told what's happened in the news this week. It's also why is this important for banks, and then you've got strategic recommendations on top of that. I find these reports are really useful for if you've got ALCO or you've got a board meeting. It's just really useful to have this report that you can look and say, have these questions been asked already? And if they haven't, then it's an easy win, because you've got the list of questions there, you've got things that you might not have otherwise considered. I find them really useful for facilitating discussions at ALCO and boards and even pricing committee. The other thing that we have on the Global Banking Hub is how-to guides. If you don't know how to create a certain report, or you don't have any experience in putting together, for example, an LCR, you've got all these how-to guides where you can easily just click in and it gives you step-by-step instructions of how to do everything treasury related. Anything that's not on there and you want it to be on there, then just let me know and I'll easily put something together so that you've got that how-to guide. It is a very comprehensive list of resources that we've got there. Everything from stress testing, liquidity, to capital, and even interest rate risk in the banking book. You've got all those resources in one area. And finally, the courses. The courses are really great for the Global Banking Hub. The thing I love the most about the courses is that every course you can complete them in under an hour. So it's essentially a series of videos, and then as you watch them, you tick them off. And then at the end, you have the option of whether you want to take a certificate or not. So if you want to impress your boss, it's always great to have an extra certificate. So these certificates are really great just to show you're actively learning and that you're really passionate about banking and that you're trying to get ahead essentially. These are the reasons why I think a Global Banking Hub membership is really great. You also get access to the weekly banking newsletter, which comes out every Friday morning. That is highlights of all the key information about what's happened this week in global banking, what's happened on the Global Banking Hub. I'm hoping in the future that I can start putting on events and I can start doing masterclasses, for example, where you'll be able to just log in online and then I can host a session on hedging or interest rate risk or whatever it is that you're interested in. I can host a session and put something together that will hopefully be really useful for you. If you're interested in that, then let me know. If you're interested in membership, then you can have a look on the website for more information about memberships. It's globalbankinghub.com. If you've got any questions in the meantime, then feel free to get in touch with me. I'm Claire Trifle. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me on the Global Banking Hub. Thanks for watching.